If you were the most controversial coach in the National Football League, the last place you would ever want to find yourself is standing under bright lights with hundreds of reporters staring at you, waiting for answers. But that is exactly where Kevin Stefanski suddenly found himself, and what was supposed to be a routine scouting trip instantly turned into one of the most uncomfortable public moments any NFL coach has faced in years. The NFL Combine in Indianapolis is usually a quiet battlefield of strategy. Coaches walk the halls studying prospects, executives hold closed-door meetings, scouts gather information that could shape the future of their franchises. Everything about the event is controlled, professional, and calculated. But the moment Stefanski stepped into the media area, the entire atmosphere changed. Instead of polite questions about 40-yard dash times or vertical jumps, they were waiting to confront the man at the center of one of the league's most controversial coaching stories. Within seconds, the questions started flying. They asked about the disastrous locker room reports that had surfaced during the previous season. They asked about the brutal player evaluations that had placed him near the bottom of the league's coaching rankings. And most of all, they asked about the situation involving rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders, a story that had quietly grown into one of the most talked about controversies across NFL circles. Stefanski tried to keep the conversation focused on football. He attempted to redirect the discussion toward the upcoming draft class, mentioning how impressive some of the young quarterbacks looked during workouts. He talked about offensive systems, player development, and the importance of building the right culture inside a franchise. But the media wasn't buying it. Every attempt to move the conversation forward was immediately pulled back into the same uncomfortable territory. The questions became sharper, the tone became colder. It was clear that the room wasn't going to let him escape the topic that had followed him all the way from Cleveland. And then, something even more awkward happened. As reporters continued pressing him, murmurs began spreading through the surrounding crowd. Scouts, media members, and NFL staffers who were walking through the area started to slow down, realizing something unusual was unfolding. A small crowd formed around the stage as the tension inside the room continued to build. For a moment, it felt less like a press conference and more like a public interrogation. Stefanski's answers became shorter, his voice tightened. At one point, he paused mid-sentence, clearly searching for the right words, while cameras captured every second of the silence. The same coach who once looked calm and confident on the sidelines now seemed trapped in a situation he couldn't control. And the reason was simple. The Combine wasn't just about evaluating college prospects anymore. For Stefanski, it had become a referendum on his reputation across the entire league. Because behind every question being asked that day was a much bigger story, one involving a fractured locker room, a controversial decision surrounding a young quarterback, and a firing that stunned people across the NFL. But the most shocking part of this entire situation wasn't the awkward press conference. It was the growing realization among insiders that Stefanski's reputation had already been damaged long before he ever stepped onto that stage in Indianapolis. And to understand how things reached this point, you have to go back to the moment when the coach suddenly began appearing everywhere, trying to rewrite the story before the league finished telling it. Long before the tension-filled moment at the Combine, Kevin Stefanski had already begun a very calculated campaign to repair his image. Across the NFL media landscape, his name suddenly started appearing everywhere. Podcasts, interviews, radio shows, insider panels. One by one, Stefanski began stepping in front of microphones again. At first, it seemed like a normal off-season media run. Coaches often speak publicly after difficult seasons. They reflect on what went wrong, discuss lessons learned, and try to show fans that the future will be different. But this time, something about the timing felt different. The appearances didn't come months after the controversy had cooled down. They came almost immediately, right as criticism around the league was reaching its peak. And the message Stefanski delivered in those interviews followed a very specific pattern. He repeatedly praised Shedeur Sanders. During one high-profile podcast appearance, Stefanski leaned forward into the microphone and delivered a line that instantly caught attention across NFL circles. He said he had absolutely loved coaching Sanders. He went even further, describing the young quarterback as someone who had the perfect mindset for the league and was wired exactly the way a franchise quarterback should be. On paper, those words sounded supportive. They sounded like the kind of praise any young quarterback would want to hear from his coach. But for many fans, analysts, and even former players watching the interview, the reaction was immediate skepticism. Because the version of Stefanski speaking on those podcasts sounded nothing like the coach people had watched throughout the season. During the year, the relationship between Stefanski and Sanders had appeared tense, awkward, and at times completely disconnected. Game plans often seemed to limit Sanders' strengths instead of highlighting them. Play calls raised eyebrows among commentators, and several moments on the field sparked debates about whether the coaching staff truly trusted their rookie quarterback. So when Stefanski suddenly began describing Sanders as a future superstar, people started asking a very uncomfortable question. If the coach believed in him so strongly, why didn't it look that way on Sundays? Clips from the interviews quickly spread across social media. Fans dissected every sentence. Analysts replayed the quotes on television panels, and the reaction wasn't the redemption story Stefanski may have hoped for. Instead, it triggered a wave of criticism. Some fans accused him of trying to rewrite history. Others called it an obvious attempt at damage control. Even former players began weighing in, pointing out that locker rooms can easily tell when praise comes after the fact, rather than during the moment when it actually matters. The truth was simple. Words spoken on a podcast can sound powerful, but in professional football, actions on the field carry far more weight. And that's where the real problem started. Because anyone who had watched the Browns season closely could remember one specific moment, a single decision during a critical play that seemed to contradict everything Stefanski was now saying in public. It was a moment that left fans stunned, analysts confused, and players quietly questioning the direction of the entire offense. And once that play happened, the narrative surrounding Stefanski began to spiral in a way he couldn't control. Because the film didn't lie, and what the cameras captured during that game would become one of the most debated coaching decisions of the entire season. Every NFL season has a moment that fans point to when everything starts to unravel. A single play, a single decision, something that seems small at the time, but later becomes the moment everyone circles back to. For Kevin Stefanski, many people believe that moment came during a late-season game when the Browns were fighting to keep their playoff hopes alive. The atmosphere inside the stadium was electric. The game had come down to the final moments, and Cleveland had just scored a touchdown that gave them one last chance to tie things up. All they needed was a successful two-point conversion. In situations like that, teams almost always lean on their best playmaker, and for Cleveland, that player was supposed to be their rookie quarterback, Shedeur Sanders. Sanders had been drafted to lead the future of the franchise. His ability to extend plays, read defenses, and create something out of chaos was exactly what made him such an exciting prospect. Moments like a two-point conversion were supposed to be tailor-made for his skill set. But when the Browns' offense lined up for the play, something immediately felt wrong. Shedeur Sanders wasn't on the field. At first, fans thought it might be a temporary substitution or some kind of trick formation. But as the seconds ticked down and the offense got set, the realization hit everyone watching. The Browns were about to run the most important play of the game without their starting quarterback. The confusion inside the stadium quickly turned into shock. Commentators in the broadcast booth hesitated, clearly surprised by what they were seeing. Analysts watching the game across the league began posting questions online. Even players on the sideline looked visibly puzzled as the play unfolded. The conversion failed. Just like that, the Browns lost the game. But the loss itself wasn't what people kept talking about afterward. It was the decision that led up to it. Within minutes, the clips started circulating across social media. Fans replayed the moment again and again, trying to understand the logic behind the call. Football analysts broke down the formation frame by frame, and almost everyone kept coming back to the same conclusion. Why would a coach remove his starting quarterback from the field during the most critical play of the entire game? Some defenders of Stefanski suggested it might have been an attempt to surprise the defense. Others speculated that it was part of a larger strategic idea that simply didn't work. But inside the locker room, according to reports that later surfaced, the reaction may have been far more complicated. For a young quarterback trying to establish himself as the leader of a franchise, moments like that carry enormous weight. When the biggest play of the game arrives and the coaching staff decides to go in another direction, it sends a message, whether intentional or not. And many observers began wondering if that message had just been delivered to Sanders in front of the entire football world. The debate exploded across sports media over the next several days. Some analysts defended the decision as aggressive play calling. Others labeled it one of the most baffling coaching choices of the season. But what truly made the situation worse was what started leaking out afterward. Because according to growing whispers around the league, the two-point conversion controversy wasn't just a bad play call, it was a symptom of something much deeper happening behind the scenes. And inside the Browns facility, tensions between the coaching staff and players were reportedly reaching a breaking point. What happened on that two-point conversion didn't stay on the field. In the NFL, moments like that echo far beyond a single play. Players talk about them in the locker room, veterans dissect them in film sessions, and slowly, those small questions can grow into something much bigger. Inside the Browns facility, rumors began circulating that the atmosphere had quietly shifted after that game. At first, it was subtle, a few players speaking less during meetings, body language on the sidelines that looked slightly colder than usual. Small moments that fans watching from home might not notice, but people inside the building definitely did. In professional football, trust between a coach and his quarterback is everything. The entire offense revolves around that relationship. When the quarterback believes the coach has complete faith in him, the system works. But when even a small crack forms in that trust, it spreads quickly through the entire locker room. According to reports that started surfacing around league circles, several offensive players were confused by how the situation with Shedeur Sanders was being handled. Sanders had shown flashes of the talent that made him one of the most talked-about young quarterbacks entering the league. His ability to extend plays and stay calm under pressure had impressed many observers early in the season. But week after week, the offensive structure seemed to put the rookie in difficult situations. There were games where the play calling appeared extremely conservative. Other games featured complex packages that didn't seem tailored to the rookie's strengths. Analysts began pointing out that the system looked disconnected from the type of quarterback Sanders actually was. And players inside the locker room were noticing the same thing. Some veterans reportedly began questioning whether the coaching staff truly believed in the direction of the offense. Others wondered if the constant adjustments were hurting the development of the team's most important young player. None of these concerns were shouted publicly. NFL locker rooms rarely operate that way. Most of the tension happens quietly, in side conversations, in subtle comments during interviews, in the tone players use discussing the season. But over time, the pattern became harder to ignore. The offense struggled to find consistency, close games kept slipping away, and every time something went wrong, the spotlight somehow drifted back to the relationship between the coach and the quarterback. Fans began noticing it too. Social media filled with clips from games where Sanders appeared frustrated after certain play calls. Commentators started questioning the long-term plan for the offense. Even former NFL players appearing on sports shows began hinting that something inside Cleveland didn't look right. None of it was confirmed directly. Much of it existed in the world of speculation and league chatter. But one thing became clear. The Browns organization was dealing with more than just a difficult season. They were dealing with a growing internal divide. And eventually, that tension reached the point where ownership could no longer ignore it. Because what happened next was something that almost never happens in the NFL, a decision so abrupt that it shocked people across the entire league. As the Browns' difficult season dragged towards its conclusion, the tension around the organization was becoming impossible to ignore. The offense looked out of sync, the locker room rumors kept growing louder, and questions surrounding the handling of Shedeur Sanders were dominating the conversation around the team. Normally, ownership would wait for the final game to finish before making any drastic decisions, but according to reports that later surfaced, the situation had already reached a point where patience was running out. Instead of waiting for the usual Monday announcements, the Browns made a move that stunned people across the league. Kevin Stefanski was dismissed on a Thursday, several days before the team was even scheduled to play its final game of the season. That timeline immediately caught attention around the NFL. Firing a head coach before the season ends is extremely rare, especially when only one game remains on the schedule. Most organizations prefer to avoid the public chaos that comes with such a move. It creates headlines, it invites speculation, and it sends a message that something inside the franchise has gone seriously wrong. But Cleveland's ownership apparently felt the situation had reached that point. League insiders began reporting that concerns were growing about the long-term impact on the team, particularly when it came to the development of their young quarterback. The Browns had invested heavily in their future, and there was a growing belief that the current environment wasn't helping that vision move forward. When a franchise believes its most important player could be affected by internal dysfunction, decisions suddenly become much easier to make. So the call was made. Stefanski's time in Cleveland was over before the final whistle of the season had even blown. Inside the NFL, the move sent a very clear signal. This wasn't just a routine coaching change. It suggested that ownership believed the problems surrounding the team were serious enough that they couldn't allow the situation to continue for even one more week. But as dramatic as that firing looked from the outside, an even more damaging development was about to follow. Because shortly after Stefanski's departure, a report surfaced that revealed how the players inside the organization had truly felt about the leadership situation all along, and the results were brutal. Just when it seemed like the Stefanski situation had finally reached its breaking point, another piece of information surfaced that made the entire story even more damaging. This time, the criticism wasn't coming from analysts on television or fans arguing online. It was coming from the players themselves. Every year, the NFL Players Association releases an anonymous survey where players across the league evaluate their own organizations. They grade everything from training facilities and team travel to coaching leadership and communication. Because the feedback is collected anonymously, players are usually very honest about how they actually feel inside their franchises. Around the league, these report cards are taken seriously. Owners read them, front offices study them, and coaches know their reputation inside the locker room is often reflected in those numbers. When the latest results were released, one name immediately jumped out: Kevin Stefanski. According to the survey results circulating around league insiders, Stefanski's coaching grade landed near the very bottom of the entire NFL. The evaluation placed him among the lowest-ranked head coaches when it came to player confidence and leadership. For a coach who had once been praised for his offensive mind and calm leadership style, the ranking was a stunning fall. Around the league, people started asking the same question. How does a coach drop that far in the eyes of his own players? Because those surveys reveal something that the public rarely gets to see: the honest opinions of the men inside the locker room. Players spend more time with their head coach than almost anyone else in the organization. They experience the leadership style every day during meetings, practices, and games. When that many players collectively deliver a low grade, it usually means deeper frustrations have been building for a long time. Analysts quickly began comparing Stefanski's evaluation to some of the league's most respected coaches. At the top of the rankings were names like Sean McVay, who consistently received praise from players for communication and trust. Coaches like McVay had built reputations for empowering their quarterbacks and creating systems where players felt supported. The contrast made Stefanski's ranking even more noticeable. For fans already debating the way Shedeur Sanders had been handled during the season, the report card seemed to confirm many of their suspicions. If the quarterback situation had caused tension inside the locker room, it was possible that the survey results were reflecting that larger frustration. Of course, surveys can't tell the entire story of a season.
They capture opinions in a specific moment, and every locker room goes through ups and downs. But in this case, the timing couldn't have been worse.
The Browns had just fired their head coach before the season ended. Questions about leadership were already dominating sports talk shows, and now an anonymous player evaluation was adding another layer of criticism to the situation. For Stefanski's reputation across the league, the damage was starting to pile up. Because in the NFL, coaches rarely get judged by just one moment. Their careers are shaped by patterns, the way players respond to them, the way locker rooms react under pressure, and whether organizations believe they can lead a team through difficult seasons. And yet, despite everything that had just happened in Cleveland, one franchise looked at the situation and decided they were willing to take the risk. The Atlanta Falcons, a team with playoff ambitions and a locker room culture that would soon be watching their new head coach very closely. In the NFL, second chances happen all the time. Coaches get fired, disappear for a season or two, then quietly return as coordinators somewhere else. Sometimes they rebuild their reputation slowly, sometimes they earn another head coaching opportunity years later. But what made Kevin Stefanski's next move so surprising was how quickly it happened. Not long after his exit from Cleveland, the Atlanta Falcons made a decision that immediately raised eyebrows across the league. Despite the controversy surrounding his final season with the Browns, Atlanta chose to hand Stefanski another opportunity to lead a franchise. For many analysts, the move felt risky from the very beginning. The Falcons weren't a rebuilding team searching for a long-term experiment. They were a franchise trying to take the next step towards serious playoff contention. The roster had talent, the fan base expected progress, and the locker room was filled with players who believed the team was close to competing at a much higher level. Bringing in a coach whose reputation had just taken such a public hit meant one thing: every decision he made would immediately fall under the spotlight. Inside the organization, the pressure was enormous. Team owner Arthur Blank had spent years trying to rebuild the Falcons into a stable contender. The franchise had already experienced its share of painful moments and near misses. Hiring Stefanski was essentially a bet that the issues in Cleveland had been circumstantial rather than a reflection of deeper leadership problems. But around the NFL, skepticism remained strong. League insiders quietly wondered whether the Falcons had underestimated how much baggage Stefanski was bringing with him. The locker room stories from Cleveland were still fresh. The NFLPA report card had just circulated through team offices across the league, and the situation involving Shedeur Sanders was still being debated by analysts and fans alike. That meant Stefanski wasn't walking into Atlanta with a clean slate. He was walking into a microscope. Every interaction with players would be watched closely. Every offensive decision would be analyzed, and most importantly, the way he handled the team's quarterback situation would be scrutinized by media outlets that had already spent months discussing his previous controversy. Falcons players understood the stakes too. NFL locker rooms are built on trust and accountability. Veterans quickly recognize whether a coach is consistent in his leadership. Younger players watch carefully to see how the system treats them. If a coach earns the respect of the room, the team rallies behind him. But if doubt creeps in, that tension spreads quickly. That's why many observers believed Stefanski's first few months in Atlanta would be critical. Training camp meetings, early season play calling, and the way he communicated with his players would all shape how the locker room responded to his leadership. For Stefanski, it wasn't just about winning games anymore. It was about proving that the narrative following him from Cleveland didn't define who he was as a coach. And for a brief moment, it seemed like he might actually get the chance to quietly rebuild that reputation. But then, the NFL Combine happened, and suddenly the entire football world was reminded that the controversy surrounding Kevin Stefanski hadn't disappeared at all. By the time the NFL Combine arrived in Indianapolis, Kevin Stefanski was hoping the worst of the storm had already passed. The offseason is usually when controversies fade. New storylines take over, fans start focusing on draft prospects, free agency rumors, and the excitement of the upcoming season. For a coach trying to rebuild his reputation, the Combine should have been the perfect place to quietly get back to work.
Instead, it turned into the moment the entire situation exploded back into the spotlight. The NFL Combine is one of the most controlled environments in professional football. Teams evaluate prospects, scouts exchange information, and coaches meet privately with players who could soon become the future of their franchise. Media sessions are normally calm and professional, focused mostly on roster plans and draft strategy. But when Stefanski stepped into the media area that day, the atmosphere immediately felt different. Reporters weren't interested in the usual questions about quarterback prospects or offensive line depth. The room had already made up its mind about what it wanted to discuss.
Within moments, the questions started coming from every direction. They asked about the controversy surrounding his departure from Cleveland. They asked about the NFLPA player grades that had ranked him near the bottom among league coaches. And once again, the conversation quickly circled back to the same name that had followed Stefanski for months, Shedeur Sanders. Stefanski tried to keep his answers measured. He spoke carefully, choosing each word with the kind of caution that comes from knowing every sentence will be analyzed later. He repeated many of the same talking points he had used during his recent media appearances, emphasizing respect for players and focusing on the future rather than the past. But the room wasn't letting the story move forward. Every response seemed to trigger another question digging deeper into the controversy. Reporters pressed him about locker room relationships. They asked whether the situation with Sanders had been misunderstood. Some even pushed him to explain specific decisions from the previous season. The tension inside the room began to build. People walking through the combine facility started noticing the unusual scene. Media members gathered closer. Scouts paused nearby, listening to the exchange. What was supposed to be a routine press availability was slowly turning into something far more uncomfortable. At one point, Stefanski paused mid-answer, clearly aware that the conversation had slipped completely out of his control. For a coach trying to move past the criticism surrounding his previous season, the moment felt like the league itself was forcing him to relive it all over again. And the most difficult part was that the combine stage left nowhere to hide. Every camera was recording, every reporter was taking notes. Within minutes, clips from the exchange were already spreading online, reigniting debates about his leadership and the decisions that had defined his final months in Cleveland. For the Falcons organization, the moment was especially awkward. Their new head coach, the man they had trusted to guide the franchise forward, was now standing in front of the entire football media world defending his past instead of discussing the team's future. What should have been a quiet scouting event had suddenly become a public reminder of the controversy that still surrounded him. But the most surprising twist in this entire saga wasn't what happened to Stefanski, it was what happened to the young quarterback at the center of the storm. Because while the coach's reputation continued to face questions, Shedeur Sanders was quietly building a completely different narrative of his own. While Kevin Stefanski spent the offseason defending his decisions and trying to reshape the narrative around his coaching career, another story was quietly unfolding in the background. The player at the center of the entire controversy, Shedeur Sanders, wasn't fading away under the pressure. In fact, he was doing the exact opposite. For most young quarterbacks, a turbulent rookie season can derail confidence completely. The NFL is already one of the most demanding environments in professional sports. When a first-year player faces criticism, coaching instability, and constant media attention all at once, it can take years to recover. But Sanders seemed to respond differently. Instead of getting pulled into the drama surrounding the coaching situation, he focused on something far simpler: improving his game. Reports from off-season training sessions suggested he had doubled down on preparation. Film study sessions became longer, workouts became more intense. The young quarterback appeared determined to prove that his future in the league wouldn't be defined by a chaotic first season. Inside the Browns organization, the tone surrounding Sanders also began to shift. With the coaching change behind them, the franchise made it clear that their long-term vision was built around developing their quarterback. Team executives started emphasizing stability, player development, and building an offensive system designed to highlight Sanders' strengths rather than restrict them. For many fans, the shift felt like a reset.
The same player who had spent much of the previous season dealing with questions about play calling and offensive structure was suddenly being talked about as the centerpiece of the team's future. Analysts who had once debated whether he was being utilized correctly were now discussing how much potential he still possessed. Even around the league, opinions started evolving. Several former players and commentators began pointing out how impressive it was that Sanders had managed to stay composed through such a complicated situation. Quarterbacks often carry the weight of an entire franchise on their shoulders, and dealing with internal turmoil during a rookie season only magnifies that pressure. Yet, Sanders had survived it. More importantly, he had emerged from the controversy with his reputation largely intact. Fans noticed his professionalism during interviews, teammates spoke positively about his work ethic, and as the offseason progressed, the conversations surrounding his career began shifting away from the past drama and toward the possibilities ahead. In many ways, the narrative had quietly flipped. The coach who once controlled the direction of the offense was now fighting to repair his image in a new city. Meanwhile, the young quarterback who had been questioned throughout the season was becoming the player Cleveland believed it could build around for years to come. Stories like this happen often in professional sports. Coaches come and go, systems change, leadership evolves. But the players who manage to stay focused through the chaos are usually the ones who end up shaping the future of their teams. And for Shedeur Sanders, surviving the storm may have been the very thing that prepared him to lead the next chapter of the Browns franchise. Which leaves one final question hanging over the entire situation. Was Kevin Stefanski simply a coach caught in a difficult season, or was the league witnessing the beginning of a reputation that might follow him for the rest of his career? In the NFL, reputations can change quickly. A coach can go from respected strategist to controversial figure in the span of a single season. One decision, one locker room conflict, or one public moment can completely reshape how the league views a leader. And right now, Kevin Stefanski finds himself standing directly in the middle of that kind of crossroads. The events of the past season created a narrative that he hasn't been able to fully escape. The questions surrounding his relationship with Shedeur Sanders, the sudden firing in Cleveland, the low player evaluation grades, and the uncomfortable spotlight at the Combine all combined to form a story that spread quickly across the football world. For some fans and analysts, the conclusion already seems obvious. They believe the season revealed serious leadership issues that could follow him wherever he goes next. But the NFL has always been a league built on second chances. Now, with the Atlanta Falcons, Stefanski has an opportunity that many coaches never receive after such a turbulent exit. A new locker room, a new roster, and a chance to prove that the problems in Cleveland were more about circumstances than capability. Still, the pressure surrounding that opportunity is enormous. Atlanta isn't just evaluating whether Stefanski can win games. The organization is watching closely to see how he leads players, how he handles adversity, and whether he can build the kind of trust that successful teams depend on. Because if the same questions that followed him from Cleveland begin appearing again in Atlanta, the fallout could be even more intense. In NFL locker rooms are unforgiving environments. Players expect honesty, consistency, and belief from their coaches. When those elements exist, teams rally together. When they don't, the cracks appear quickly, and the entire league notices. That's why the next chapter of Stefanski's career may end up being the most important of all. If he manages to guide the Falcons toward success, the narrative surrounding him could shift dramatically. The criticism might fade into the background, remembered only as a rough season in an otherwise solid coaching career. But if the same controversies start resurfacing again, the Combine moment in Indianapolis might be remembered as the point when the league truly began questioning his future. Because in professional football, reputations are built slowly, but they can unravel incredibly fast. And right now, the entire NFL seems to be watching closely to see which direction Kevin Stefanski's story will go next. But what do you think?
Is Kevin Stefanski getting an unfair second chance, or are the Atlanta Falcons taking one of the biggest risks of the upcoming season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.